Hi, this is Mrs. Banneker. I'm going to be talking to you about sentence fragments and run-ons to make sure that those sentences that you have in your writing are understood by everyone because they are clear and complete. So let's start with sentence fragments. A fragment is just a fancy way to say an incomplete sentence. It's punctuated like a sentence, but it's missing one of the three requirements that we need for a complete sentence: a subject, verb, and complete thought. We could have really short sentences like he ran. That is a subject and a verb, and it is a complete thought. However, we can't do that with every verb. We can't say he wants or he needs. Some verbs require that you have an object that follows them, like one of those sentences. You would need to say he wants something in order for it to be complete thoughts. You have to have those three things. In other words, a complete sentence has to have at least one independent clause. If independent clause is a term that is unclear to you, it's unfamiliar to you, go back in the grammar videos and watch the video on phrases and clauses before you go any further in here. Because I'm going to be talking about independent clauses and dependent clauses, and if you don't understand what I mean by that, it's going to be a little bit more confusing, and that video will clear up any confusion that you might have. So let's look at some examples of sentence fragments. Sometimes we skip over these because we maybe complete the meaning in our heads as we're reading through our writing, or it just feels like a complete thought to us. We speak in sentence fragments, so sometimes we write the way we speak. So let's look at these and really think about, does it have each of these three things? So our first example: on a cold wintry night in March. That's got a noun in it. We're talking about a wintry night, but there's no verb and it's not a complete thought. What we really have here is just a couple of prepositional phrases. We could tack these onto a sentence to add a little bit more detail, but they can't be a sentence on their own. So we could change it up, add a few words, and make it seem like it might have more of those requirements. Because it was a cold wintry night in March, we have a noun that's acting as a subject, it. It is paired with the verb was, but that word in front, because, makes this a dependent clause. It means that we have to tack this on to an independent clause in order to complete its meaning. It kind of leaves us hanging. So neither of these are complete sentences. We need to add on to them to make sure that they're complete. Some other trouble that you might run into as you're writing is the run-on sentence, and you might see your teacher comment on this in your writing. A run-on sentence is when you have two or more complete sentences or two or more independent clauses that are capitalized and punctuated as if they're one sentence, so they're kind of shoved together. We have two different kinds of run-on sentence. The first kind is a fused sentence, and this is where we have two or more sentences. We capitalize them and punctuate them like they're one sentence, but we haven't separated them with any kind of punctuation. The other kind of run-on sentence is a comma splice. This is only linked with a comma, so we have separated our independent clauses with a comma. We think we're good, but we actually aren't supposed to use a comma like that. Let's look at some examples. Here's a fused sentence. Columbus gazed upon the vast Atlantic. His mind was filled with apprehension. Those are two separate independent clauses. We have two complete thoughts here, two subject verbs, complete thoughts, but we've just shoved them together without any punctuation. If we add a comma between those independent clauses there after Atlantic, then we have a comma splice. Both of these are incorrect, and they can make your writing sound a little bit confusing. The reader has to stop and think about what's going on here. So let's see how to fix these. Here's how to correct run-on sentences. We could connect our two independent clauses or more independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction and a comma. So if we were going to take that same sentence, we could add in the conjunction and put a comma before it and make a complete sentence, and the sentence is a little bit more clear. We see how those clauses are related. We could use a semicolon because you can separate two independent clauses with a semicolon. So here is that same sentence with a semicolon. And you can also, after the semicolon, you could add in a conjunctive adverb and a comma afterwards, like you could say, Columbus gazed upon the vast Atlantic. Meanwhile, his mind was filled with apprehension. And that would be totally acceptable, and it might give your sentence a little bit more transition. You could make two or more sentences. Wherever you have an independent clause, you could put in a period and stop the flow if you want a longer pause, and just have two sentences. Just make sure you capitalize the new sentence. Or you could make one of those independent clauses into a dependent clause or a subordinate clause by adding a subordinate conjunction, a word like because or when. One of those words, it's like a red flag that means it's a dependent clause and it needs to have an independent clause to complete its meaning. So we could add in the word when at the beginning, when Columbus gazed upon the Atlantic. And you need to make sure that if you do that, you put a comma after that dependent clause if the dependent clause comes first in the sentence. So here are just some ways to make sure that you are looking for these common errors in your writing, and now that you know what to look for, you also know how to fix them. If your teacher wants you to, there are some exercises below. You can complete those just to make sure that you understood it. You can do that even if your teacher didn't want you to.